The Midianite desert stretched endlessly under a sky ablaze with the fiery hues of a setting sun. The golden sands shifted gently with the breeze, whispering secrets of ancient times. In the distance, rugged mountains stood as silent sentinels, their jagged peaks etched against the deepening orange horizon. The air carried the scent of acacia trees and the faint bleating of goats returning to their pens. It was a land that seemed forgotten by the world, but alive with its own quiet majesty. Among this vast and untamed wilderness lived a woman whose name would echo through the annals of sacred history, Zipporah. She was no ordinary figure in the tapestry of the Bible. Daughter of Jethro, the priest of Midian, she embodied a blend of strength, wisdom, and spiritual insight. But who was she really? Was she merely a supporting character in Moses' epic journey, or did her life hold a significance that has often been overlooked? The story of Zipporah begins far from the opulent courts of Pharaoh and the bustling marketplaces of Egypt. It starts here, in the unassuming yet spiritually profound solitude of Midian. This desert was not just a backdrop. It was a crucible, a place where lives were forged and destinies shaped. And it was here, amidst the humble yet vibrant life of her people, that Zipporah's journey intersected with the grand narrative of divine purpose. Yet, her life was not defined by the sands of Midian alone. She was a woman of depth, rooted in her own traditions, yet willing to embrace the unknown. Her courage would later shine in moments of crisis, her wisdom guiding one of the greatest prophets in history. But before all that, she was simply Zipporah, a Midianite shepherdess with a destiny yet to unfold. As we delve into her story, one question beckons us. Who was Zipporah, and how did she influence the divine mission of Moses? This is more than a tale of ancient history. It is a journey of resilience, faith, and the quiet power of a woman who played a pivotal role in God's unfolding plan. In the chapters to come, we will walk beside Zipporah through the moments that defined her life. We will witness her courage at a well, her role as a cultural bridge, her pivotal act of faith in the wilderness, and the lessons her life imparts for us today. But for now, let us pause here, in the desert of Midian, and prepare to embark on a story as rich and complex as the land where it began. The well was more than a source of water in the ancient world. It was a hub of life. In the harsh and arid landscapes of the Near East, wells were sacred spaces where survival and community converged. Shepherds gathered there to water their flocks. Weary travelers paused to refresh themselves, and stories were exchanged beneath the sheltering shade of nearby trees. It was no coincidence that wells were often the setting for divine encounters in the Bible. Isaac, Jacob, and now Moses all met key figures in their lives beside these vital lifelines. On this particular day, the well outside the land of Midian was alive with activity. Zipporah, alongside her sisters, approached with jars balanced skillfully on their shoulders, their steps sure despite the shifting sands beneath their feet. They were no strangers to the demands of shepherding, accustomed to the rhythm of caring for their father Jethro's flock. But what should have been a routine task soon turned into a scene of tension and confrontation. A group of shepherds, their voices loud and their demeanor aggressive, gathered near the well. They were known for bullying others, driving off women and weaker herders to claim the precious water for themselves. Today, they fixed their eyes on Jethro's daughters, their intention clear. Zipporah and her sisters hesitated. They had faced this harassment before, and the thought of another fruitless struggle hung heavy in the air. But before the shepherds could act, a figure stepped forward, a stranger, his clothes dusty from travel and his expression resolute. Moses. Having fled Egypt, Moses was now a man in exile, his princely garments traded for the humble attire of a wanderer. His journey had been one of brokenness and rediscovery, and it was in this moment of seeming insignificance that his destiny began to pivot. Seeing the injustice before him, Moses did not hesitate. He confronted the shepherds, his voice firm and his presence commanding. The confrontation was swift. The shepherds retreated, their protests swallowed by the desert wind. Grateful yet cautious, Zipporah watched the stranger. There was something different about him, something both weary and noble. He was not like the men of Midian, nor did he carry himself with the arrogance of the oppressors her people had encountered. Who was this man, and what brought him to their land? Moses, for his part, offered no grand explanation. Instead, he turned his attention to the flocks, drawing water for them as if it were the most natural thing in the world. This act of humility spoke volumes, and for the first time, Zipporah felt a stir of curiosity and respect for the mysterious traveler. When they returned home that evening, Jethro listened intently to his daughter's account of the day's events. The tale of Moses' bravery piqued his interest, and he extended an invitation for the stranger to join their household. What began as an act of hospitality would soon evolve into a bond that reshaped not only Moses' life, but the course of history itself. For Moses, this meeting was more than an escape from the burdens of his past. It was the beginning of his preparation for the future. And for Zipporah, it was the first step in a journey that would challenge her faith, broaden her understanding, and ultimately place her at the heart of one of the Bible's most extraordinary stories. This encounter by the well reminds us that moments of courage and kindness can set into motion events far greater than we can imagine. What seemed like a simple act of standing up for justice became the foundation for a relationship that would influence the destiny of nations. As the sun set over Midian that day, the lives of Moses and Zipporah were forever intertwined. But what would this union mean for them as individuals and as part of God's greater plan? How would the cultural divide between a Midianite woman and a Hebrew man shape their journey? The union of Moses and Zipporah was not merely a marriage. It was a collision of worlds. On one side was Moses, a Hebrew raised in the Egyptian palace, now a fugitive in a foreign land. On the other was Zipporah, a Midianite woman deeply rooted in the traditions of her people. Their lives represented two distinct cultures, each with its own customs, beliefs, and ways of understanding the divine. Yet, through their relationship, these differences would become a bridge, forging connections that would shape their destiny and God's unfolding plan. The Midianites, descendants of Abraham through Keturah, shared a distant kinship with the Hebrews. Yet, over generations, their paths had diverged. The Midianites were a nomadic people, deeply spiritual, and their faith was centered around the worship of the one true God, a tradition upheld by Jethro, Zipporah's father, who served as a priest of Midian. Their spiritual practices, while distinct from those of the Hebrews, resonated with themes of humility, reverence, and communal worship. It was within this environment that Zipporah had been raised, instilled with a quiet strength and a profound sense of duty. Moses, on the other hand, carried the weight of a dual identity. Though born a Hebrew, he had been immersed in the grandeur and polytheistic culture of Egypt. The wilderness of Midian was a stark contrast to the opulence of Pharaoh's court. Yet it was here that Moses began to rediscover the faith of his ancestors. It was no coincidence that God led him to Jethro's household, a place where spiritual wisdom and hospitality intertwined. Zipporah's role in this narrative was both subtle and significant. As Moses struggled to reconcile his identity and calling, she became a source of strength and insight. Her familiarity with the desert's rhythms and her grounding in Midianite spirituality provided Moses with a sense of stability during his years of exile. But more importantly, Zipporah's presence challenged Moses to look beyond his own cultural framework and embrace a broader understanding of God's work in the world. Jethro, too, played a pivotal role in this dynamic. As a priest and leader, he imparted wisdom that would influence Moses' later leadership of the Israelites. The bond between Jethro and Moses grew deeper over time, and their mutual respect bridged the gap between their cultures. Through Jethro, Moses learned valuable lessons in governance and delegation, principles that would later guide him as he led the Israelites through the wilderness. Yet, bridging cultures was not without its challenges. Moses and Zipporah faced tensions that arose from their differences. As Moses prepared to return to Egypt, where God had called him to lead the Hebrews out of slavery, these tensions would come to the forefront. Zipporah, a Midianite by birth, would now find herself thrust into the heart of the Hebrew story, a journey that would test her faith and resilience. In many ways, their marriage symbolized the broader theme of unity amidst diversity. It reflected God's ability to weave together different peoples and traditions into a single redemptive plan. Their relationship was a testament to the power of mutual respect, understanding, and shared purpose, even in the face of profound differences. As we consider this bridge between cultures, it invites us to reflect on the relationships in our own lives. How do we navigate differences in background, belief, or perspective? Can we, like Moses and Zipporah, find ways to build bridges instead of walls? Their story reminds us that unity is not about erasing differences, but about finding common ground in the midst of them. With the stage set for Moses' return to Egypt, a new chapter in their journey was about to begin. But before they could embark on this divine mission, they would face a crisis that would test their faith, courage, and commitment to God's plan. Extraordinary courage and decisiveness, Zipporah stepped forward. Taking a flint knife, she circumcised her son herself, a task that would have been physically and emotionally grueling. Then, with the foreskin in hand, she touched Moses' feet, declaring, "Surely you are a bridegroom of blood to me." This act, though cryptic, carried profound symbolic weight. It was an act of intercession, an offering that appeased God's wrath and preserved Moses' life. What drove Zipporah to act with such boldness? Perhaps it was her deep spiritual intuition, her understanding of the covenant even as a Midianite. Perhaps it was the fierce love and protective instinct of a wife and mother. Whatever the motivation, her actions reveal a woman of remarkable faith, willing to do what was necessary to align her family with God's purposes. Theologically, this episode underscores the seriousness of covenant faithfulness. God's mission through Moses could not proceed without full obedience to his commands. It also highlights the indispensable role of Zipporah in the divine narrative. Without her intervention, Moses might not have survived to fulfill his calling. In this way, she became not just a supporting figure, but a central player in God's redemptive plan. For Moses, this moment was a humbling reminder of the cost of leadership and the necessity of total consecration to God. For Zipporah, it was a defining moment that demonstrated her resilience and spiritual discernment. Together, they emerged from this crisis, not as a fractured family, but as one more deeply committed to the mission ahead. As readers, this mysterious and dramatic scene challenges us to reflect on the nature of obedience and intercession. What are the areas in our lives where we may have neglected God's covenant? How can we, like Zipporah, act with courage and faith to align ourselves and our loved ones with his purposes? With this act, the immediate danger was averted, and the journey toward Egypt continued. But the questions raised by this episode lingered, shaping Moses and Zipporah as they stepped into the next phase of their mission. Their path ahead was still uncertain, but one thing was clear: God's plan required their complete trust and unwavering faith. The road back to Egypt was long and fraught with uncertainty. For Moses, it was a journey both physical and spiritual, a reluctant return to the land of his upbringing, now carrying the weight of God's command to deliver his people. Accompanying him were his wife Zipporah and their sons, a family stepping into a mission that none of them fully understood. Yet on this journey, an event occurred that was as mysterious as it was pivotal, one that cast a sharp light on the nature of covenant, obedience, and faith. The biblical account in Exodus 4 verses 24 to 26 is brief, but brimming with tension. At a lodging place on the way, the Lord met Moses and was about to kill him. But Zipporah took a flint knife, cut off her son's foreskin, and touched Moses' feet with it. "Surely you are a bridegroom of blood to me," she said. So the Lord let him alone. The scene unfolds in the dead of night, at a resting place along their journey. The air was likely thick with silence, broken only by the whispers of the desert wind. Yet, within this quiet moment, danger loomed, a divine threat so urgent and severe that it shook the very foundation of Moses' mission. God, the very one who had called Moses to lead the Israelites out of Egypt, now sought to kill him. The text does not explain why, but the implication becomes clear. Moses had failed to fulfill a crucial act of obedience, the circumcision of his son. Circumcision was more than a physical act. It was the sign of the covenant between God and Abraham, a mark of belonging and consecration. For Moses, a leader chosen to bring the Israelites back into covenant with God, this omission was no small matter. It symbolized a lapse in his own alignment with the very God he was called to serve. The stakes were life and death, and the responsibility to act fell squarely on Zipporah. In a moment of extraordinary courage and decisiveness, Zipporah stepped forward. Taking a flint knife, she circumcised her son herself, a task that would have been physically and emotionally grueling. Then, with the foreskin in hand, she touched Moses' feet, declaring, "Surely you are a bridegroom of blood to me." This act, though cryptic, carried profound symbolic weight. It was an act of intercession, an offering that appeased God's wrath and preserved Moses' life. What drove Zipporah to act with such boldness? Perhaps it was her deep spiritual intuition, her understanding of the covenant even as a Midianite. Perhaps it was the fierce love and protective instinct of a wife and mother. Whatever the motivation, her actions reveal a woman of remarkable faith, willing to do what was necessary to align her family with God's purposes. Theologically, this episode underscores the seriousness of covenant faithfulness. God's mission through Moses could not proceed without full obedience to his commands. It also highlights the indispensable role of Zipporah in the divine narrative. Without her intervention, Moses might not have survived to fulfill his calling. In this way, she became not just a supporting figure, but a central player in God's redemptive plan. For Moses, this moment was a humbling reminder of the cost of leadership and the necessity of total consecration to God. For Zipporah, it was a defining moment that demonstrated her resilience and spiritual discernment. Together, they emerged from this crisis not as a fractured family, but as one more deeply committed to the mission ahead. As readers, this mysterious and dramatic scene challenges us to reflect on the nature of obedience and intercession. What are the areas in our lives where we may have neglected God's covenant? How can we, like Zipporah, act with courage and faith to align ourselves and our loved ones with His purposes? With this act, the immediate danger was averted, and the journey toward Egypt continued. But the questions raised by this episode lingered, shaping Moses and Zipporah as they stepped into the next phase of their mission. Their path ahead was still uncertain, but one thing was clear: God's plan required their complete trust and unwavering faith. Zipporah's story is one of resilience, faith, and the often overlooked strength required to play a supporting role in a larger mission. While her appearances in the biblical narrative are brief, they are profound, offering lessons that transcend time and culture. Her life challenges us to reflect on themes of courage, partnership, and the quiet yet powerful ways individuals can shape history. Resilience in the face of uncertainty. Zipporah's journey was far from easy. As a Midianite, she was thrust into the unfolding story of the Hebrew people, a world far removed from her own. Her decision to leave the familiarity of Midian and accompany Moses into the unknown was an act of remarkable resilience. She willingly stepped into a life filled with uncertainty, trusting her husband's divine calling even when the path ahead seemed unclear. For us today, Zipporah's resilience serves as a reminder of the strength required to navigate life's uncertainties. Whether it's facing personal challenges, supporting a loved one's journey, or stepping into uncharted territory, her example inspires us to trust God's plan even when the way forward is difficult to see. Practical lesson. When faced with uncertainty, consider how faith and resilience can guide your decisions. Reflect on the areas of your life where you need to trust God's plan, even when it doesn't align with your expectations. Faith and obedience under pressure. Zipporah's defining moment, her decisive action to circumcise her son, reveals her deep spiritual insight and willingness to act under pressure. She recognized the gravity of the situation and stepped forward when it mattered most, demonstrating a faith rooted in action. Her obedience was not just about fulfilling a ritual. It was an act of intercession that preserved her family and aligned them with God's covenant. In modern life, we often encounter moments that require quick, faithful decisions. These moments may not be as dramatic as Zipporah's, but they are no less significant. Her story teaches us the importance of being spiritually attuned and ready to act when circumstances demand it. Practical lesson. Think about the areas where God is calling you to act decisively. It might be stepping out in faith to help someone in need, standing up for what is right, or making a difficult but necessary choice to honor your commitment to God. The power of supportive leadership. Though Moses is often the focus of this narrative, Zipporah's role as his partner was indispensable. She offered a different perspective, grounded in her own culture and faith, which complemented Moses' journey. Her courage and wisdom were instrumental in critical moments, showing that leadership is often shared, with both visible and behind-the-scenes contributions. In our lives, we are frequently called to support others, whether in our families, workplaces, or communities. Zipporah reminds us that supportive roles are not secondary. They are vital to the success of any mission or relationship. Practical lesson. Reflect on how you can be a supportive leader in your relationships or teams. Consider how your unique perspective and strengths can contribute to a shared goal. Empowerment through faith. Zipporah's life also speaks to the empowerment that comes from trusting in God. She was not defined by her limitations or by the male-dominated culture of her time. Instead, she demonstrated agency, wisdom, and strength, becoming an integral part of God's story. Today, her story encourages individuals, particularly women, to embrace their God-given abilities and roles. Faith empowers us to rise above societal limitations and make meaningful contributions, no matter how small they may seem. Practical lesson. Identify the areas where God is calling you to step out in faith. Trust that He has equipped you with the strength and wisdom needed to fulfill your role in His plan. Overcoming challenges together. Moses and Zipporah's marriage was not without its struggles. Their cultural differences and the pressures of Moses' calling created challenges, yet they remained united. Their story reminds us that relationships, especially those rooted in faith, require effort, communication, and a shared commitment to God's purpose. In our relationships today, Zipporah and Moses' journey encourages us to find strength in unity and to work through differences with grace and understanding. Practical lesson. Think about how you can strengthen your relationships through mutual support and shared faith. Take time to pray together and seek God's guidance in navigating challenges. Zipporah's life offers timeless wisdom for modern believers. Her resilience, faith, and courage continue to inspire, reminding us that God often works through those who are willing to trust Him, even in the background. As we reflect on her story, we are challenged to live with the same boldness and conviction, knowing that our actions, however small they may seem, can have a profound impact on God's greater plan. As we turn to the conclusion of this story, we will explore the lasting legacy of Zipporah's life and how her example continues to resonate as a testament to perseverance, faith, and purpose. As the desert winds of Midian whispered through the ages, so too has the legacy of Zipporah endured, a legacy of courage, faith, and quiet strength. Her life, though often overshadowed by the monumental figure of Moses, stands as a testament to the indispensable roles played by those who stand alongside history's great leaders. Zipporah was not just a wife or a supporting character. She was a bridge, an intercessor, and a vital thread in God's tapestry of redemption. The hidden strength in supporting roles. Zipporah's story reminds us that greatness is not always found in the spotlight. Her actions, saving Moses' life, raising their children, and faithfully journeying alongside her husband, were pivotal in the unfolding of God's plan. Without her, Moses' mission might have faltered before it began. Her legacy challenges us to redefine leadership and influence. Often, it is those who act in the shadows, who make sacrifices unseen by the world, that leave the most enduring marks on history. Zipporah exemplifies the power of supportive roles, showing us that faithfulness in the small things can have eternal significance. Reflection. In our own lives, how can we embrace the roles God has given us, even if they seem small or unnoticed? How can we use our gifts to support others and further God's purposes? The courage to act in faith. Zipporah's courage in circumcising her son stands out as one of the most dramatic and mysterious moments in her story. It was a moment that required not only physical bravery, but spiritual discernment. Her quick thinking and decisive action saved her family and restored their alignment with God's covenant. Her legacy calls us to act with similar boldness in our faith. When God places us in critical moments, we may feel unprepared or uncertain, but like Zipporah, we can trust that He equips us for the tasks He calls us to. Reflection. Are there areas in your life where God is calling you to take bold action? What steps can you take to strengthen your trust in His guidance? Faith as a bridge between cultures. Zipporah's marriage to Moses symbolized the merging of two cultures, Midianite and Hebrew, into a partnership that advanced God's mission. She navigated this union with grace, balancing her identity as a Midianite while embracing her role in the Hebrew story. Her legacy challenges us to become bridges in our own communities, fostering understanding and unity across differences. In a divided world, Zipporah's life shows us the power of mutual respect and faith in building connections. Reflection. How can we become peacemakers and bridge builders in our own relationships? How can we honor and learn from those whose backgrounds differ from our own? A model of perseverance and purpose. Above all, Zipporah's life reflects perseverance. She journeyed through the wilderness with Moses, faced challenges that tested her faith, and remained steadfast in her role within God's greater plan. Her story is a reminder that faithfulness often requires endurance, especially when the path ahead is uncertain or difficult. In today's world, where instant results are often expected, Zipporah's legacy teaches us the value of patience and long-term faithfulness. God's purposes unfold in His timing, and our role is to remain faithful, trusting that our efforts are not in vain. Reflection. Where in your life are you being called to persevere? How can you find strength in God's promises as you continue your journey? An enduring testament. Zipporah's story may be brief, but its impact is lasting. Her courage, wisdom, and faithfulness ripple through history, influencing not only Moses' mission, but also our understanding of God's work in the lives of ordinary people. She reminds us that no act of faith is too small to be significant in God's eyes. As we close her story, we are left with a powerful truth. God uses each of us, in our unique roles and circumstances, to fulfill His purposes. Like Zipporah, we may not always see the full picture, but we can trust that our faithfulness contributes to something far greater than ourselves. Let her legacy inspire us to live with courage, act with faith, and persevere with purpose. For in doing so, we too become part of the unfolding story of God's redemption, a story written not only in the grand acts of leaders, but also in the quiet faith of those who stand beside them.